Jessie, a fugitive in Detroit after witnessing her father's murder, staged as an accident by Victor, an art smuggler, proposes to Frank, a cynical mechanic, to fix his V8 Impala in exchange for a safety call. The deal fails when Jessie realizes the shop's phone would be traced, exposing her mother. She reveals she ran after seeing the stolen painting, the Angel of Warsaw. When Frank's son is arrested, Jessie uses the art secret to create a distraction.
I understand.
They embark in the fixed
We'll be
Impala
ready.
to save Jimmy, planting a false lead. The tracking, however, sends Victor not to New York, but to Ohio, setting Jessie and Frank on an inevitable collision course. The Impala races toward their final destination, where justice and survival will be decided. The air inside the deserted East Detroit garage didn't smell of business anymore. It smelled of fine dust, rancid oil, and the broken promise of better days. For Jessie, blonde and slight, barely 20 but carrying a heavy soul, that smell was familiar and somehow comforting. She had been on the run for a week, leaving behind a small town in Pennsylvania and a burden heavier than any engine block she could lift. She needed to disappear, to become the grease in the shadows. Frank, the owner, a husky man in his 50s with hands like forged steel and eyes that had seen too much, watched her with absolute skepticism. He was slumped in a chair covered in tarps, reading a crumpled newspaper and puffing slowly on a cigarette. "You're telling me," Frank started, without lowering the paper, his voice hoarse from decades of smoking and diesel fumes, "that a girl who looks like she walked off a fashion magazine can fix a '68 V8 engine that's been dead for 5 years and that even my grandson, who has an engineering degree, gave up on?" Jessie didn't take offense. She was used to being judged by her looks. Her long, blonde hair was matted and oil-stained, and her clothes, once trendy, were now just rags covered in dirt. She shrugged, approaching the open engine of the Chevrolet Impala on the stand. "I didn't walk off a magazine, Mr. Frank. I walked out of the family that's owned a mechanic shop for 3 generations. I didn't go to MIT, but I know the difference between a cylinder head and a distributor like I know the difference between right and wrong." She tapped one of the pistons lightly, but precisely, with a screwdriver. The dry clang echoed in the quiet garage, and Frank's newspaper lowered an inch, revealing the skepticism in his weary eyes. 3 days, Mr. Frank. That's all I need. I'll have that engine purring like a baby. In return?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, her eyes fixed on the old red landline phone on the metal counter, the only object connecting this desolate place to the world. Frank finally lowered the newspaper, exposing a cynical look mixed with curiosity. "In return for what, Cinderella?" Jessie's heart pounded. This was the riskiest moment. She had to appear calm, but she was begging on the inside. "In return for one single phone call. You call my mother. You don't put me on the line. Just tell her, in your gruff man's voice, that I'm alive, that I'm well, and that she doesn't need to worry. And nothing more." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the sound of dripping oil. Frank scratched his beard, analyzing her, the value of the request deeply disproportionate to the favor. He knew anyone asking so little for so much wasn't just running from a bad boyfriend. She was running from something that threatened her life. Frank wasn't naive. He'd seen enough in life to know when desperation came knocking. Jessie's proposition was, at the very least, unique. He stood up, his heavy boots scraping the concrete floor, and walked over to the engine. He inspected the girl's work, noticing the precision of her movements, the way her small hands handled the tools with the familiarity of a surgeon. "The V8 engine," he muttered. "There are 1,000 ways to ruin it. If you mess it up, I lose this machine forever." Jessie looked at him, her green eyes steady, unblinking. "If I mess it up, I'll give you what's left of my $37 and you turn me over to the police. I have nowhere to go and I prefer a jail cell to the uncertainty of the streets." The confidence in her promise convinced Frank. The risk for Frank was minimal, but his curiosity was immense. He nodded, accepting the silent wager. 3 days. The phone's right there, but I make the call. If that engine roars, I'll call the number you give me, and I'll say exactly what you asked. No questions, no details, no knowing where you are, and nothing more." Jessie felt overwhelming relief. She scrawled a Pennsylvania number on a piece of brown paper and handed it to Frank. That number was a secret, and Frank now guarded it. She knew the call was a thin line. Her mother, Beth, was her only anchor, but the reason she ran was a man named Victor, a shadowy businessman who could track her every move. For the next 2 days, the garage became Jessie's world. She worked tirelessly, the clang of tools and the smell of gas and oil her only shield. She slept under the Impala, using a tarp as a blanket. Frank watched her from a distance, occasionally offering a tuna sandwich or a strong coffee. He noticed she only ate when he made her, and her eyes were constantly scanning, like those of a hunted animal. Late one afternoon, Frank left for supplies. Jessie was alone. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a car slowing down on the street. It was a black sedan, dusted with road grime, that looked completely out of place in that desolate part of Detroit. Jessie's heart seized. She quickly hid under the car she was fixing, holding her breath, the smell of oil and grease becoming her camouflage. From the open engine, she could see a subtle reflection in the spilled oil on the floor, the face of a man in the car window, meticulously examining every detail of the garage with a cold, intense look. A look that wasn't searching for an address, but confirming a location. The man in the black sedan didn't get out. He just drove slowly down the street, checking the garage number. But that brief glimpse was enough to freeze Jessie's blood. It wasn't Victor, the man she feared, but one of his associates. Someone Victor would send to do the dirty work. The man had hard features, a military haircut, and a cold, methodical gaze that Jessie recognized from past parties and encounters in Pennsylvania, where Victor maintained his facade as a legitimate investor. The car sped up, disappearing down the street, but the fear remained, gripping Jessie's throat. They were hunting her. And the fact that they were in Detroit, hundreds of miles from her hometown, proved how serious the situation was. Victor's precision in locating those who crossed him was legendary. When Frank returned, he found Jessie standing near the Impala, her hand steady on a pair of pliers, but her eyes wild and vacant. He didn't ask what happened, but he noticed the immediate shift in the atmosphere. The smell of fear was palpable, replacing the scent of oil. He saw that her work had accelerated. She was working with the fury and focus of someone fleeing an invisible threat. That night, Jessie couldn't sleep. She was wide awake, listening to every sound, every passing car, convinced the black sedan would return. She tried to tell herself it was just a random car, but the certainty in her movements betrayed her. She was being hunted. On the morning of the 3rd day, the deadline, Jessie tightened the last bolt on the engine. She was covered in oil, but felt an exhausting triumph. "It's ready, Mr. Frank," she said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. Frank approached the engine with the most skeptical look she had ever seen. He lifted the hood and inspected the work. He saw the work of a professional. He turned to Jessie with a look of reluctant admiration. "You're good, kid. Real good." He grabbed the ignition key and prepared to turn over the Impala's engine. The whole garage seemed to hold its breath. Jessie closed her eyes. That engine roar would decide her fate. If it worked, she'd get her call. But if that call brought death to her mother, she would be left with nothing. The price of Frank's honesty might be Beth's life. The sound that filled the garage was a powerful, clean, and smooth roar. The Impala's V8 engine, dead for years, came to life with a controlled fury, shaking the car slightly on the stand. It was a sound of triumph, technique, and hope. Frank smiled, a genuine grin that lit up his stern face. He turned the engine off, then started it again, just to hear that pure rumble once more. He looked at Jessie, who stood there, her eyes shining with exhaustion and relief. "It's yours, kid. You fixed it. Deal's honored. Frank grabbed the red landline phone and the crumpled piece of paper Jessie had given him. She watched him, her heart hammering in her chest. The call was everything she needed. Confirmation that her mother, Beth, would know she was okay. But as Frank started to dial, the fear from the night before hit her hard. Jessie rushed to Frank and put her hand on the phone. "Wait, Mr. Frank, don't call yet." Frank looked at her confused, the phone in his hand. "What's the problem? The engine's running. A deal is a deal." Jessie's face was pale. "It is, but I can't put my mother in danger. He's looking for me. Not for me, but for him. Victor, he won't stop. If you call now, he'll trace the number back to this garage, and he'll find you, Mr. Frank, and he'll ask you questions." Frank frowned. He was about to give in, convinced by her fear, but something made him pause. He looked at the paper and then at Jessie, feeling a sharp pang of betrayal. "You're lying, Jessie," he said, his voice tense. "This isn't a cell phone or a residential number in Pennsylvania. This is a landline, and I recognize it. This number belongs to your dad's shop, Vance Auto. You don't want to call your mother. You want to know if the shop is still standing." Jessie collapsed, the relief of protecting her mother replaced by the pain of having her deception exposed. Jessie's panic wasn't about betraying her mother, but about confirming the destruction Victor may have left behind. The confirmation that her past had been burned down, and that she was utterly alone. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted by the exposed truth. Jessie's face, previously just exhausted, now revealed a deep anguish and terrible fear. She couldn't lie to Frank anymore. "Yes," she whispered, tears running down the grease on her cheeks. "Victor was threatening me with my dad's shop. He said if I ran, he'd burn it down. I needed to know if my world still existed, or if I had caused its destruction." Frank placed the phone back in the cradle. The anger he felt over the lie was replaced by compassion and understanding. Her problem wasn't just running. It was the fear of going home to ashes. "All right, Jessie," Frank said, lighting a cigarette and slowly blowing out the smoke. "We won't call, but the deal has changed. You stay, and you tell me everything. Who is Victor, and why would he threaten to destroy everything you love?" Jessie knew she had no choice. She sat on an old bench, the grease on her hands contrasting with her pale skin, and began the story. "Victor isn't a drug dealer," she started, her voice low. "He's a businessman, and he's involved in smuggling." Frank nodded, uninterested. Detroit had plenty of that. "No," Jessie continued, shaking her head. "It's not cars or cigarettes. It's rare art pieces. Victor owns a front gallery in Cleveland. 3 weeks ago, I was at my dad's shop, near one of Victor's warehouses. I was fixing his truck. I saw the warehouse door open. I saw crates. And I saw—" Jessie's voice faltered. "I saw a painting. A painting I recognized from a documentary my dad and I watched. A painting that's been missing since World War II. The Angel of Warsaw, by Władysław Podkowinski. Its value was priceless, billions of dollars." Frank straightened up in his chair, his eyes now wide. He knew the story. The painting, stolen by the Nazis. Victor's secret wasn't about Jessie's escape. It was about the art. "Are you sure?" Frank asked. Jessie nodded. "I took a picture with my phone. I know it was stupid, but it was instinct. I deleted it, but Victor must have traced the truck. He knows someone saw. He isn't worried about theft. He's worried about the identification of the painting and the trail it could leave." Frank looked at the black sedan. Jessie's panic was now his own fear. The fixed Impala now felt like a target. Silence was the only thing keeping them alive, but the truth was a double-edged sword that could explode at any moment. The weight of the information in Frank's garage was crushing. The fixed Impala now seemed insignificant compared to the revelation that Jessie had stumbled upon an international stolen art secret. Frank stomped out his cigarette on the floor. Billions, he muttered. You saw something that could get you killed and dismantle an international crime organization, all because of a truck shop. Jesse's fear was now his own reality. The deal between Frank and Jesse changed drastically. It was no longer about a call or a favor. It was about mutual survival and trust. "You're not going anywhere, Jesse," Frank stated. "If they're in Detroit, they're less than 24 hours from finding you, and if they find you, they'll find me. If you stay, we're in this together, but you have to tell me everything, every last detail." Jesse, feeling the relief of finally sharing the burden, described Victor's warehouse in Cleveland, the coordinates her father had noted, and the associate she saw in the black sedan, a man named Mitch, Victor's most loyal and brutal enforcer. Frank grabbed an old map and started marking the spots. He was a man of Detroit, with years of experience knowing who controlled what and who was in deep trouble. He focused on the one weak point Mitch might have seen, the red landline phone in the shop. "They don't have you," Frank analyzed, "but they have to start somewhere. If they're monitoring your mom, they're looking for any call. Since you didn't call, they'll trace the search for Jesse Vance within a 500-mile radius. And if Mitch came here, he saw the name of my shop." Frank paused, his eyes fixed on Jesse, his voice low and certain. Frank looked at Jesse, his eyes filled with deep sorrow. "You said you saw something you shouldn't have, Jesse, but I think it's more than that. I think you saw Victor kill someone." Jesse broke down. She sobbed convulsively, the truth she had suppressed for weeks finally overwhelming her. "I saw Victor kill a man, Mr. Frank. My dad. My dad was at the wrong shop at the wrong time. My dad knew about the painting and was threatening Victor. Victor made it look like he was crushed by a truck at the shop. The police bought it, but I didn't, and I'm the only living witness. The truck I was fixing for him was the truck he used to cover it up. I ran because I know I'm next." Jesse's burden wasn't stolen art, it was murder, and she was about to walk into the lion's den to seek justice. The revelation of her father's murder hit Frank like a punch. He drove in silence for miles, the girl's pain hanging in the cold garage air. The initial shock gave way to a protective fury. Frank now had a life to save and a quiet justice to seek. Jesse's dilemma had become his own, and he felt responsible for protecting her. While Frank processed the magnitude of the threat, the universe threw a new curveball that changed the direction of their escape. Frank's old cell phone rang. He answered it, and his face turned pale, fear replacing the anger. "Yes, this is me. Who is this?" He listened intently, his hand gripping the phone tightly. He hung up and looked at Jesse. "Who was it, Mr. Frank?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "My son's lawyer. He's in trouble. Again. Jimmy was caught with drugs and is in a jail in Ohio. Needs $10,000 for bail." The desperation in Frank's eyes was evident. He loved his son, but he didn't have that kind of money. The irony was cruel. He was involved in a billion-dollar secret, but he couldn't save his own son. Jessie approached him, her mind racing, the adrenaline of the truth pushing her forward. She thought of the painting, the warehouse, Victor. "Mr. Frank," she said, her voice firm, "I can help you. We can use this information, not for money, but for our safety. If we give Victor a false lead, he'll stop looking for us. We'll go to Cleveland. We'll give him a scapegoat." Frank's dilemma became the catalyst for a desperate move. Jesse would use the stolen art information to orchestrate a massive diversion, getting Victor off their trail and, in the process, saving Frank's son. The fear of losing Jimmy gave Frank a reason to push forward, and the certainty that Victor would never leave her alone gave Jesse the plan. She, the fugitive mechanic, was about to become a criminal strategist to save herself and her protector's family.
The new plan was bold and perilous. They wouldn't extort Victor for the bail money. Instead, Jesse would use the painting information to create a massive diversion, planting a false lead that would send Victor and his henchmen scrambling in a direction opposite to Detroit and, more importantly, opposite to Beth. Frank's son, Jimmy, was the perfect pretext for the trip. Frank, his heart heavy with Jimmy's situation, agreed, but set a condition. I drive, and if I don't like the smell of anything, we turn back. Jessie accepted. She knew she needed Frank. He was the muscle, the driver, and the adult in the room. Jessie focused on what she remembered about the warehouse. Victor's truck's scratch, the type of lock, the street. She decided the false lead would be an anonymous call to the NYPD, saying that the Angel of Warsaw would be moved to a warehouse in New York, citing a code only an insider would know. That information would reach Victor through his corrupt police contacts, forcing him to send Mitch and his men to New York.
Before they left, Jessie made Frank promise he would do one thing for her. "If something happens to me, Mr. Frank," she said, holding his hand, "you call my mother. You tell her I love her and that I was trying to protect her." Frank, moved by the girl's sincerity, agreed. "I'll call Jessie, and if something happens, you won't be alone." They took the Impala, now a symbol of hope and danger, and headed for Ohio to get Jimmy out of jail before making the final move in Cleveland. The car, with its restored V8, sang down the dark highways. Inside the car, Frank and Jessie drove in silence for miles, the girl's pain and Frank's protective fury filling the cab. The revelation of her father's murder had transformed Jessie's flight into a quest for justice. The first part of the plan was a success. They arrived in Ohio, paid Jimmy's bail, who promised Frank he would keep quiet and return home, and headed towards the outskirts of Cleveland. The final move was crucial. Jessie anonymously called the NYPD from a payphone and planted the false lead about the painting being moved to a warehouse in Queens. The precision of Jessie's details ensured the information would be taken seriously. Meanwhile, back in Detroit, Victor was making his move. He had traced the search for Jesse Vance to the Detroit area and, through his corrupt contacts, found out about Frank's shop. He sent Mitch back to the garage. Mitch found the name erased from the door, confirming his suspicion that Jesse had been there. He broke in and found the red landline phone. Using Victor's technology, he traced the last number dialed from the landline. It wasn't Jesse's mother's number, but the number for Jimmy, Frank's son, at the Ohio police station. The coincidence was insane and terrifying. Victor, upon receiving Mitch's report, the phone traced to the police station, and the false lead from New York, was forced to make a quick decision. He believed Jesse was using Frank's son as a hostage or an ally, and that the New York plan was a double bluff. He instructed Mitch not to go to New York, but to Ohio, to track Jimmy and find Jesse. Jesse's plan worked perfectly. She diverted Victor, but not to the destination she had planned, but to the location of Frank's son. The danger was now in Ohio, and the Impala was being tracked. The danger caught up to them at a roadside diner on the way back to Detroit. Mitch and two of Victor's henchmen surrounded the Impala. Frank and Jesse were in the car. Jesse's heart was pounding, but fear had been replaced by a cold fury. They didn't come because of the painting, Jesse realized. They came because of Jimmy. The plan had failed. However, Frank's courage shone through. He got out of the Impala and confronted Mitch. "She has nothing to do with this. You saw her at my shop. She was just fixing my car. If you want someone, take me." Frank's rage was a perfect distraction. While Mitch focused on the older man, Jessie acted. She called the Detroit police. Instead of giving the art lead, she gave Victor's location in Cleveland. "Victor's getting ready to move the Angel of Warsaw. He's in a warehouse in Cleveland. I'm the witness to David Vance's murder. He's moving now. Get him." What Victor didn't know was that federal law enforcement had been monitoring Victor's art gallery for months, waiting for a solid move. Jesse's tip, linking Victor's name to the missing masterpiece, was the trigger they needed. In Cleveland, Victor was arrested. Mitch and his henchmen, in the middle of wrestling with Frank, received a call about Victor's arrest. Confusion was evident.
They realized the game was over. They fled quickly. Frank was bruised, but alive.
Days later, Jesse and Frank were back at the garage, now a safe place. Detroit police had confirmed Victor's arrest and were reopening Jesse's father's case. The painting was recovered. Jesse was safe. Frank picked up the red landline phone. The danger was gone. He dialed the Pennsylvania number. Beth, Jesse's mother, answered. Frank smiled. "Hello, Beth. My name is Frank. Your daughter is alive, and she loves you. You don't need to worry." He hung up and handed the phone to Jesse. Jesse called her mother and through sobs of joy was finally able to tell her the truth. Months later, Jesse and Beth moved to Detroit. Jesse opened her own garage right next to Frank. The Impala was out front, gleaming. Jesse's dignity, stolen by fear, was restored by courage. And Frank's garage was no longer a place of loneliness, but a home of stories and new hope. Silence was the only thing keeping her alive, but a mother's heart found a way to listen. Want more stories like this? A new story awaits you tomorrow. Subscribe to the channel and get your daily dose of emotion.